The idea behind the strategic bombing campaign is that air power could be decisive. Air power could go far behind the front line and strike the enemy in their homeland and be decisive. And in the end, the strategic bombing campaign conducted by the U.S. Army Air Forces did just that. The heavy bombing campaign in Europe was incredibly important to the Allied effort in World War II, and it was uniquely American. Only America had the right kind of platform and the right kind of systems and the right kind of strategy to conduct the daylight bombing campaign in Europe in World War II. And the goal of this campaign was to essentially destroy Germany's ability to produce war material and continue fighting. Now, it wasn't a linear campaign. In fact, there were all kinds of problems. We were actually essentially defeated about halfway through the campaign. But in the end, this campaign absolutely wrecked Germany's ability to move and produce war material. The reason why this campaign was uniquely American was in part because of the platforms that we used, namely the B-17 and the B-24. Those two aircraft had turbo-supercharged engines, and the United States was the only country in World War II that used turbo-supercharged aircraft in large numbers. So we also had, with these B-17s and B-24s, tremendous ability to carry load and the range it took to fly from bases in England and Italy to strike targets deep in Europe. Also, these aircraft had tremendous firepower in their defensive armament. About 10 to 12 50 caliber machine guns typically. While this wasn't enough for the bombers to fly these missions on their own, it did take fighter escort to be fully successful. They did shoot down a number of German fighters during the campaign. The strategic bombing campaign had a huge impact on Allied victory in Europe, but it came at a tremendous price. There were more than 30,000 Army Air Forces heavy bomber crewmen who were killed in combat. That's an extraordinary number, and it's not well understood or known the tremendous sacrifice of our heavy bomber crewmen. Early in the bombing campaign, for the first year or year and a half or so, the odds of finishing a tour were only about 1 in 4. And those other 3 airmen would have been shot down and captured, or would have been killed, or would have been wounded so badly they couldn't continue their tour. And that's at a time when 25 missions meant a ticket home. So the odds of even finishing 25 missions were only about 1 in 4 for that early part of the campaign. Another example of the cost is just how many of these heavy bombers that we lost. No other country could produce aircraft like the United States. When you look at the B-17 and the B-24, there were nearly 13,000 B-17s built and more than 18,000 B-24s built. So more than 30,000 heavy bombers were built. And of those 30,000 or so aircraft, more than 8,000 were lost in combat in the fight against Germany and Europe. Stunning numbers. And these young men, typically they're in their early 20s, average age is about 22, 23. These young men knew the odds that they were facing. They weren't blind. They could see what was happening. And yet, mission after mission after mission, these young men got inside of these aircraft, and even knowing that they're probably not going to survive their tour or they're going to end up in a German POW camp, they did their duty, and as a result, the war was certainly shortened by the effort of those crewmen against Germany.